If you needed to rebuild strength in your shoulder because you just have like a shoulder problem, a lot of people get trapped in this idea that they just accept the fact that that's just my bad shoulder. That doesn't really exist. People don't just have bad shoulders. You may have injured your shoulder once, you may have injured it a couple times, you may have continued to re-injure it, and the reason why it is now your bad shoulder is because it just hasn't gotten the appropriate amount of care to make it like the other shoulder anymore. And sometimes people just accept the fact that they just have a bad shoulder. There are solutions for people who have shoulder problems for 10, 20 years, and it really comes from reconditioning, restabilizing, and making sure that the joint surfaces are what are called centrated. So this is a biomechanics thing that needs to happen where once you get injured, your tissues learn how to work around the injury. So if I sprain my ankle and I need to walk, I don't need crutches, I don't need a cast, I don't need to be in an air cast. I just rolled my ankle. It hurts a little bit. I really don't need medical attention. I'm going to walk around, but I'm not going to go get a brace. That kind of an injury. You're not going to walk the same way that you normally walk for the next like 6 weeks. And your body's going to find a way to work around that ankle or work around that shoulder. And I got to drive my car, but my shoulder hurts when I get in that position, so I'm just gonna drive with one hand now. And now my whole torso has to turn. I gotta drive the car totally different. I'm gonna lean on my shoulder different, and my whole body is learning a different way to move and just drive a car because my shoulder currently hurts, and I gotta learn that for 6 weeks. And in 6 weeks' time, every single day, you're going to create bad habits. And when the tissue heals, your bad habits don't just unlearn themselves. They often stay there. And now you've developed a bad habit in this conversation that doesn't really just go away. And your brain creates these new connections to muscles and it starts to fire them consistently now. And now you've created a compensation pattern that has stuck from an old injury 10 years ago that you never retaught your shoulder how to operate. So there's a thing in exercise therapy called neuromuscular reeducation, and it is how to retrain your brain to fire muscles in very specific pattern to optimize the joint mechanics so that it's now operating the way that it was 6 weeks ago prior to you injuring it, so that you don't keep re-injuring the same bad shoulder. It's not a bad shoulder. It just needs to be taught how to operate again because you developed bad habits when you just tweaked it and you didn't go see somebody because you really didn't need to. And you got to retrain those bad motor patterns. Otherwise, you will continue to keep re-injuring it. So there's a very specific kind of rehab that's not really strength training. You could pack all the strength you want onto a dysfunctional shoulder. If you're not firing muscles in the right pattern, you're just going to have a really strong dysfunctional shoulder. You got to retrain the muscles to fire in very specific sequences and at very specific times. There's a lot of muscles in your shoulder, and I'll give you a very easy example. Your deltoid and your supraspinatus. Your supraspinatus is a rotator cuff muscle. Your deltoid is a really big prime mover. And if you tweak your supraspinatus, maybe you strained it. You didn't need surgery, you didn't need physical therapy, you just tweaked it a little bit, overhead throwing. Your MRI was pretty much clean, but you just tweaked your rotator cuff. That muscle doesn't want to work anymore, and it's gonna probably not work the way that it's supposed to, and you're gonna just do things differently for a little bit, and you're gonna start recruiting a bigger muscle called your deltoid. When your deltoid fires, I'm gonna actually use a skeleton back here because it's a little easier to show it. When your deltoid fires, your deltoid is a very specific muscle that comes from here, it reaches over the top of your shoulder and it attaches into this little knob here. And when that muscle contracts to move your shoulder, it's going to have a mechanism where it lifts up a little bit this way before it rotates in the socket. When that happens and it lifts up as it rolls, it jams the ball into this joint right here called the AC joint, and that's going to cause what's called a subacromial impingement. So what's supposed to happen is this muscle here, it slips through, it's called your supraspinatus. That muscle attaches into this little knob here, and as it comes through, when it contracts, it holds this down as you rotate up so that that ball doesn't hit that joint and create that subacromial impingement. So if you injure your supraspinatus for some reason, let's say you strained it, you're overhead throwing with a friend, and you tweak your shoulder for a second, your brain starts to use the deltoid more often than the supraspinatus to just get you by. It stops using your supraspinatus for the next 6 weeks, and then when the tissue heals and you're out of pain, you kind of forget about your supraspinatus. You don't just start recruiting it magically, and now you've got a chronic subacromial impingement because your brain needs to learn how to use this muscle again, because it kind of trained itself to not use it anymore. And you got to retrain it on how to use it properly again and refix those biomechanics. And that's called neuromuscular reeducation. It has nothing to do with the strength of the muscle and everything to do with how your brain fires the muscle and when. And it's a timing sequencing problem.